Wait a second. Did I just hear one of President Trump's top 3 choices for the Fed say that it's very important for the Fed to be independent even of President Trump? Is that possible? Yes, it is, because all this stuff is overblown, and the people he's picking do care about Fed independence, and everyone wants to go after Trump because he has an opinion on monetary policy, which he's entitled to do, but the people he's talking about here understand the Fed's proper role, and they're bold enough to be able to say that when they're questioned about it, and Kevin Hassett is Exhibit A on that. So I'm tired of hearing about that. Everybody's saying that Trump wants to destroy Fed independence. No, he wants to restore accountability for this thing, which it desperately needs.
Can I jump on that?
Yeah.
Because Scott Bessent, you brought up his op-ed that he wrote in the Wall Street Journal on Friday that came out during the show. I was able to really dig into it after, and I thought there was a lot of gold in there. He was talking about what the Fed should be doing. He called it, well, the title of the op-ed was "The Fed's Gain of Function Monetary Policy." And what he was doing was making a comparison to the COVID pandemic. And basically, he said, as we saw during the COVID pandemic, lab-created experiments can wreak havoc when they escape their confines. And he's talking about monetary policy coming out of the Fed since the crisis in 2008. And I would say putting it in that context is really important. Bernanke had a hand in this. Yellen had a hand in this, as well as Jerome Powell. And you had Fed chairs who basically we're printing money hand over fist with interest rates at 0 for an extended period of time. Yeah. And I've been screaming that just cannot last forever without imploding. And so we're at this stage now where we're running into trouble here. And then we were talking to Larry after. He said, I love the piece, but the one thing that Bessent didn't talk about was the dollar. And Steve Forbes was talking about it on this show on Friday, that when you print money and you devalue the dollar, you create another massive problem in the United States that we should be focused on keeping that dollar, viable and keeping it as the reserve currency, not doing that when you water it down in this way.
Totally.
So I'm not surprised we're in the boat that we're in.
It's such a brilliant title for that piece, too, though. I'm glad you raised that, because that is the main problem with the Fed. They have acquired too many functions. They try to do too much, and they're bad at the thing they should be good at doing.
Well, and central planners are always wrong, but I was really glad to hear Bessent emphasize the importance of independence from the central bank. I mean, if we're going to have a central bank, my God, let it be independent from the executive branch. I mean, look throughout history. Mussolini, Stalin, Saddam Hussein, Maduro, Mugabe, all of these dictators ruined their economies by dominating and owning and running their own central bank. So let's not make the same mistake here that was made in so many third world countries by letting the executive branch run the central bank.
But none of the administration members are saying off with independence just because President Trump has been expressing his opinion on where he thinks that rates should be. I mean, he's got freedom of speech, too. He can say what he thinks.
Trump's critics say a lot of that, and the press picks it up and say, oh, he wants to destroy independence. But Bessent says independence. Hassett said the same thing you just said.
Right.
Look at the worst countries. They all destroy independence of the central bank. Hassett said that in response to the question about him serving. These guys are on the same page.
And Myron was asserting in his hearing independence as well.
So when Trump says, I want you to lower the rate by 3 percentage points, like he said earlier this year, is Bessent really going to be independent enough to say, I'm sorry, Mr. President, that's not our purview?
I think so.
But I don't think they would be in a situation where they'd be locking horns on it, because policy-wise, you can make the case that Jerome Powell should have been lowering rates, given the data that we do have.
Yeah, I agree. Short-term rates should be lower, and the market has been telling Jay Powell that as long as the president has, if not longer, just looking at the 2-year. But, Jerry, the Fed has functioned as an economic FEMA to bail out reckless gamblers for decades. It really beginning with the bailout of long-term capital management, which wasn't the Fed, but certainly the Fed was involved. And then it just mushrooms from there. And anytime markets blow up, the Fed has to swoop in and rescue the reckless and bail out the gamblers. And don't tell me that the next time that happens, and they've worked, the Fed chief and the central bank have worked in lockstep with whatever administration was in charge. Look at the bailout during the financial crisis. The banks got bailed out, and like, what did the American people get? Jack. Again, it goes back to Mondani and socialism and all of that. So we can talk about Fed independence, but we really won't know what independence means until the shinola hits the fan yet again.
And you're right. It effectively does make policy, institute policy. The Fed's right deeply involved in it with everybody's agreement, time and time and time again. If it's not the Fed and the housing market, it's the president, it's Congress making it easier for people to borrow money to buy houses. That's why the whole housing crisis happened, right? Suddenly we're allowing people to borrow more and more and more and more and more money. You know, this administration even has a proposal out there to make it easier to borrow money, to show less information, to make how you spend your money count as part of how you are regarded as a borrower in this country. So there are crazy ideas even coming out of this administration that makes the government too involved in that process. So, Dagan, I think you got a point there.
What? You're.
I think I think she's right. You do have a point there. We need government out of this business. Let the free market be free.
He's harumphing in favor of.
Yeah, I just think that we need a clearing and cleansing moment when it comes to gambling, because everybody has gotten kind of propped up since the mid-90s.